In this video I have some more tactics from the Soviet-Afghan War, and it's going to be some notes on Afghan Mujahideen raid tactics. Reportedly, the Mujahideen were extremely successful at conducting raids to the point that they could wipe out entire security positions or smaller bases. And they were known to infiltrate major cities, major base areas to attack important areas such as governmental buildings, military headquarters, and stuff like that. So this stuff's going to be kind of general. It comes from two different ways. You're either raiding this position to capture supplies, or you're raiding this position to wipe it out. It's kind of mixed together in the book. The book I am pulling this from is Tactics of the Crescent Moon by H. John Poole. Now, the Mujahideen would approach from multiple routes at night. They would meet up at rally points, take up hide positions, and rest through the day. While this is going on, teams would recon and observe the objective and the raid positions, where you were going to assault from, where you were going to support from. They would also meet up with any spies and infiltrators to get the latest intelligence as to what was going on in the area, especially in the target for the raid. It was extremely common for the Mujahideen to employ infiltrators on enemy bases. Intel was always a priority before conducting these operations. If they didn't have proper intel, they would not conduct the operation. They rested during the day, as I said, and then once the evening would approach, you're starting to get the sun going down. The now consolidated elements would move into positions. You had 4 teams that would be employed, or 4 basic teams. The actual number of teams they employed depended on their target. You had assault teams, support teams, and the assault and support, it looked like, were basically together. Containment teams, which was your security. And if it was a supply raid, you had supply and evacuation teams. Now, as they're moving up into position, the containment teams would seal off the likely routes that the enemy would use to reinforce the target. The assault teams would approach and try to enter silently from multiple directions. If they could do it, they would attack from all sides. If they could get all the way into the target before they would launch the attack, they would do it. The support teams would provide cover from the outside. They would only open fire when it was needed, or if it was needed. And if they did have to open fire, they would pour in fire from at least 4 sides, or at least 3 sides, preferably 4 sides. This was done to confuse the enemy so they did not know which side to reinforce, which side was the main assault. The heaviest weapons that were typically employed were RPGs and machine guns. These were fired from positions beyond the protective minefields. For machine guns, think about the largest that they were probably employing were PKM or PKMS machine guns. They were not employing heavy weapons, no 12.7 millimeters, no recoilless rifles. Typically. I'm not saying that they weren't used in the attack. I'm sure they were a few times, but for the most part, it was lighter weapons so that they could get out of the area quickly if they needed to. Now, if the assault team was not able to make it in easily and covertly, It was not uncommon for the assault team to try to clear the path in front of them through the protective minefields by heaving large rocks in front of them. Then they would use those stepping stones or holes where the mine went off as their stepping points to get through the minefield. To cover the explosions that were going on in the minefield, you would see an increase in RPGs and rockets used against the position. Once they made it into the position, they would try to cause even more chaos. Machine gun large groups of troops, grenades into tents, into buildings, blow up or sabotage critical equipment. If it was a supply mission and they did it covertly, they would steal the weapons and supplies and try to get out without the enemy being aware of it. These weapons and supplies were potentially brought back to the support position, where your supply and evacuation teams would then collect them up and evacuate them out of the area. If they succeeded in overrunning the position, then those supply and evacuation teams would enter the post and evacuate them from the position directly from there. As they would pull out, the support teams would provide the covering fires needed for the withdrawal. Now, one of the reasons they said for the attacks primarily happening at night is the Soviets were very reluctant to leave their posts at night, and rarely did Soviet aircraft fly at night. When they did employ indirect fires and airstrikes, it was found to be extremely ineffective in narrow terrain. So if they could, they would try to approach through narrow valleys and that stuff to get to the enemy's base camps. This was all supposed to be done as covertly as possible. So not too much different than what you've seen in Vietnam and other locations. Silently get through the mine, silently get through the wire to get into the base before you launch the attack. If you're doing it for supplies, you're covertly getting into the position, grabbing what you need, and slipping it back out through your breach points. Now, if you're employing something like this, if it's a supply operation, you're going to have priorities as to what you're going to get. What do you need the most? Do you need more RPGs? Do you need more mortar rounds? Do you need more machine gun ammo, more mines, whatever it is? And you prioritize that. Because if you can't grab a lot, well, then you're better off grabbing the things that you need the most instead of wasting your time grabbing, say, 7.62 millimeter pistol ammo for pistols that you may only have a couple of. So you discuss with your team that's going in, what's the priority? What are you trying to grab? What's the top of the list? And then that's what they get out first. If it's to annihilate the post, it was not uncommon from what I read where once the assault force was in position, they may potentially signal with a flashlight to an infiltrator on the inside. That infiltrator would then see the signal and then maybe toss a ladder over the wall, because it was not uncommon for their positions to be surrounded by mud and stone walls. So they'd toss the ladder over the wall so that the assault team could climb up over the ladder and get inside easily. Or potentially that infiltrator is taking out a couple sentries quickly and quietly. The Afghans reportedly enjoyed taking out sentries using knives, garrots, and whatever they had available to try to save their ammunition. So once they got inside, they would get into position, hopefully before the enemy realized they were there, and then they would launch their attack. Their initial indication that attack was going on could be satchel charges getting tossed into you know, the base operations center through the door. Could be hand grenades going off inside the troop tents, inside the buildings that are being used as barracks. Another common thing, just like you've seen with Vietnam, the enemy sappers would get into the enemy base camp. If it's to destroy particular pieces of equipment, such as aircraft, they would get in, plant their charges, set the timers on their charges, and reportedly the Mujahideen used a lot of time pencils. If you don't know what those are, look them up. And then the assault force, the sappers, would leave the base, and then once the time came that those charges were supposed to start going off, they would then start dropping rounds, mortar rounds onto the base. Just a few of them. You don't want to use a lot of them. Try to time them with when the explosions are supposed to be going off, so that the force inside would believe they were lucky shots. I came across a note that said at Kandahar airfield, reportedly the Afghans fired off only 2 or 3 mortar rounds, but one of those mortar rounds succeeded in setting off a chain reaction that destroyed 8 aircraft in a line on the airfield. Years later, did people realize that more than likely what it was infiltrators or sappers that got in, planted their charges, and used the mortars as a cover. So, just some basic ideas on how they did it. I know it's not a ton of details, but it's a variation of how to conduct raids. Reportedly, I didn't mention, the size of the teams employed were typically 20 personnel. It was not unheard of for the Mujahideen to use hundreds of troops or hundreds of Mujahideen warriors in a single raid. They preferred larger numbers of troops during raids to assist with carrying off the captured equipment and supplies, and potentially take away any prisoners. The Mujahideen did capture prisoners who were sent back to Pakistan for interrogation by Western intelligence. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.